Lena hadn't noticed that Frances had caught sight of her flirting with Carlton. She didn't enjoy flirting with Carlton at all, but that was the plan Millie and Olivia came up with to keep pressure off Olivia. "So your rabbit made a jailbreak?" Carlton teased Lena. "Are you sure he loves you?" They sat on a small antique sofa in one of the main corridors of the Perry estate, which didn't leave much room for space between the two of them. "Of course Nuggets loves me," Lena cried, indignant. "I spent so long looking for him when he escaped. He was so snuggly when I found him." Lena hugged herself when she said the word snuggly. Carlton wouldn't have admitted it, but he found that extremely cute. He was finding everything Lena did extremely cute. Carlton cleared his throat. "Where did you find him? Did he go back to his little rabbit family in his little rabbit hole or wherever they live?" "No, I am his family. He's a mama's boy." Lena scrolled through her pictures, looking for a different one. "We actually found him inside the big bag of alfalfa I feed them from. He chewed through it and was inside, completely stuffed." Lena showed Carlton a picture of a big bag of green hay with a hole chewed into it. Carlton leaned closer to look, their shoulders pressed together, and laughed. He also ate all the herbs Millie was growing. That little criminal. "Smart guy," Carlton smirked. Maybe that's why he was so snuggly. He was just full and sleepy. Lena laughed, pretending to deny the strong possibility that that was true. "No, it's because he loves me so much." Carlton laughed too. "Was he mad that you caught him?" "He actually was," Lena yelled, still surprised. "Oh my God, look." She pulled up another picture of a white rabbit with little red eyes squinting, and Carlton's jaw dropped in surprise. "He actually looks mad. I didn't know a rabbit could get little angry eyes." "I know." Lena made eye contact with Carlton, seemingly realizing for the first time how close their faces were to one another. Carlton wasn't usually the person who did the work of furthering a conversation and continuing it, but he didn't want this particular moment to end. "Do you have any more pictures of them?" he asked. Lena's eyes widened. "Shut up. Did you really just ask me that? I hope you have nothing to do for the rest of the day." "I got them little dinosaur costumes for Halloween." They hated them. As Lena held up the picture, Carlton looked from the phone to her face. He hadn't realized before that she had a really nice smile. He noticed that she had dimples. He liked dimples. In Carlton's mind, time was slowing down, but Lena chattered obliviously. "My plan was to do this little Godzilla thing and take a picture of them destroying mini skyscrapers, but did you know that papier-mâché is, very hard to do?" Carlton was trying to decide how he could describe the color of Lena's eyes. They were brown, but honey brown, maybe? "Carlton, did you hear me?" Lena was looking at him expectantly. Yeah," he decided to bluff. "I totally agree." "Exactly!" Lena seemed pleased and excited. So he had said the right thing. "I completely ruined my carpet. I got in so much trouble." Carlton looked down at her hand on the bench next to his, and her leg. He desperately wished he could put a hand on her knee, or her thigh. He gulped. "She has a boyfriend," he reminded himself internally. But then he remembered back to the scene he witnessed between Steve and Wendy. She has a boyfriend who's a total scumbag, messing around with another girl behind her back. Or they're not exclusive yet or something. What a douche, she's Fat Rabbit. A gamer as good as she is shouldn't be with some snake who can't commit to her. She probably has low self-esteem. That podcast my cousin showed me said that's a good thing. But that podcast has also been wrong about literally everything else about girls so far. "Carlton, is something wrong?" Lena's cute eyebrows were knitted together. "You look mad or something, or do I have something on my face? I think after every meal so far, a bit of it ends up on my cheek. Ugh." Lena wiped frantically around her mouth. "No, I'm just concentrating on what you're saying, really hard." "About Cheese's food allergies?" Lena seemed suspicious. Carlton hoped he would get away with his bluff again. "Yeah, That's really important." Lena nodded and shrugged, accepting this. "It really is." Carlton had an idea. He peered at Lena's face. "You know, now that you mention it, there is a little bit of something on your face." "Oh no, where is it? Did I not get it already?" Lena wiped more frantically around her face. "Here, I got it." Carlton reached a thumb toward her chin, which was completely spotless. He ran his thumb along her jaw. Lena looked at him curiously and blinked. She shook off the feeling. Is it gone?" "Yeah," Carlton said. Lena fidgeted with her hair. "Well, anyway, that was super embarrassing. What was I saying?" As Lena continued to talk, the tension in the air between them dissipated. Carlton made a decision. "I should make a move," he thought. "Steve is seeing someone else. It's just like, equally if she does the same thing. And hey, I'm a Perry. She's on my estate. I'm practically famous. Who wouldn't want me to make a move on them? Come on, greatest knife master? I can do this. I'm a man. I'm a man." Carlton took a deep breath and held it, ready to do something huge, and put his hand down next to Lena's, with just their pinky fingers touching. Lena froze mid-sentence. She looked down. "Oh," she said with a shy laugh. She pulled her hand away, clasping her fingers together in her lap. "Oh, sorry, I didn't even realize I was touching you. My mistake." Carlton laughed, backpedaling. "I wasn't trying to make a move or anything. It's just a small bench. I think people were smaller back when this was made." "Totally, I get it," Lena said, but was clearly not buying it. She locked her phone and stood in a hurry. "Well, I think that's it for me for the tour. I learned so much. It was perfect. Bye-bye." Lena put her head down and rushed away. Carlton cursed himself, watching her go. "I messed that up. I totally messed it up," he thought. "What a weird, out-of-the-blue afternoon with Lena. One of the best gamers I've ever known. Besides myself," he corrected. During dinner, Olivia, Millie, Lena, and Wendy filled their plates with Royal Perry's excellent French cuisine, casting surreptitious glances around the banquet hall. Many angry gazes were turned on by Lena. Their plan had worked perfectly. They walked confidently through the tables of the banquet hall, enjoying the eyes that were subtly and not so subtly on them. Lena would not have admitted it to her friends, but she got dressed for dinner with the knowledge that everyone would be looking her way. This particular dress helped her bear the pressure of all the jealous stares. "Have a stride of pride," Lena internally repeated to herself like a mantra. "Stride of pride." The friends normally tried to choose a table on the edges, or at least away from other people, so their conversations couldn't be easily overheard. But today, they sat right in the middle of everything. They were situated in between many other full tables, and a pathway where people walked by. Olivia adjusted her voice to a stage whisper. It was a little raspy, like she was whispering for real, but still at a volume where the people around them could easily hear her. "So, Lena, I heard you were hanging out with Carlton Perry the whole afternoon?" Lena rested her chin on her hand like she was coquettishly sharing gossip. "Yeah, we had a great time. He's such a fun, interesting person, and has so many cool things to share about the Perry estate. We went through 4 different galleries of knives and swords, and it was not boring in the slightest." Millie chimed in. "Lena, I'm so glad you had such an incredible time with Carlton." "Olivia, I heard a rumor that is going to make you pretty upset, but please don't take it to heart." "Oh no, what rumor is that?" Olivia pretended to be concerned. "I hope I can take it. I'm so stressed about trying to get Royal Perry's last knife." All of the girls noticed with satisfaction that people around them were subtly trying to listen and looking their way. "Well," Millie continued, "I'm sorry to be the one to say it, but apparently Royal Perry is going to choose Carlton Perry's wife and give her the last knife to woo her into marrying Carlton. He has decided to just use it as a gift for his future daughter-in-law." "I heard that too," Lena agreed. Carlton definitely hinted that this was the case. Wendy leaned over to Lena. "Doesn't that mean you're a front-runner for the last knife, Lena?" It's only been a few days, but I haven't seen anybody else that Carlton has even spoken to." Lena acted like she was disappointed. "Oh, I actually don't have any hope of being given the last knife. Carlton and I don't like each other like that. We're just friendly old acquaintances. Carlton has his heart set on somebody else, a flame from his past." Olivia raised her eyebrows like she was curious. "Really? Who is that?" Lena looked around as though she was trying to make sure there was nobody listening. In reality, she actually could tell that everyone was. Lena crooked her index finger to Olivia, Millie, and Wendy. "Come closer. I really shouldn't be saying this in the middle of so many people." All of her friends leaned closer to her, and everyone around them leaned closer to her too. Lena muttered something. Olivia sat back as if in shock. "No way," she cried. Millie also leaned back in her chair in fake surprise. "How could it be her? I had no idea." Nobody around them had heard, but all of their curiosity and attention had been whipped up to a silent, frustrated frenzy. Whispered conversations popped up all around them, with people trying to check in with their companions about whether or not they had successfully heard who Carlton's secret paramour was. "What was that name? I didn't quite hear." Wendy squinted, pretending to try to parse what Olivia had just told her. "Did you say Carly? Carrie?" "Shh!" Olivia shushed Wendy loudly, acting worried that anybody around them would find out. As Olivia glanced around them, all of the eavesdroppers in the area snapped back to sitting upright, cutting bites of their food, pretending like they were minding their own business. Wendy pretended to have an epiphany, slapping a hand on her forehead. "Oh, you must have said Carolina Crawford." "Shush!" Olivia lunged toward Wendy as everyone in their vicinity's eyes widened. "Lower your voice," Lena admonished. "Forget it. We shouldn't even be talking about this here. Let's just eat our food and talk about something else." "Yes, please," Olivia said. "Okay," Millie nodded. "Sorry, I couldn't hear you," Wendy said, acting bashful about her mistake. Olivia opened her mind to listen to the thoughts buzzing around her. Carolina Crawford. Carolina Crawford. The Crawford girl. That's who's getting the knife. We had it all wrong. We have to take out the Crawford girl. On the inside, Olivia gloated about their plan going off perfectly. "Do you want to execute a sloppy murder plot with me in your crosshairs, Carolina?" she thought happily. "Good luck surviving all the attention I just sent your way." After Olivia, Millie, Lena, and Wendy were finished with their meal and stood to walk out of the banquet hall, practically all the guests in competition for the last knife were talking about how their biggest rival and target was Carolina Crawford. This was just like Olivia hoped. Olivia and her friends strode out of the banquet hall and past Carolina Crawford, followed closely by her eerie family nanny, Madeline Defarge. Carolina fixed a petulant sneer on her face as she passed by them for Olivia's benefit, but otherwise ignored them. Madeline's brows were knitted together in a severe frown. Olivia could barely stifle a smile, gleeful about what Carolina was about to walk into. "You're a murderer who has absolutely no remorse," Olivia thought internally. "You didn't care about the consequences of your actions when somebody else was the victim. But let's see how you handle the heat coming your way." Carolina walked airily to her favorite seat in the banquet hall, a corner table up by the stage, with her back to the wall and a view through a window. Her eyes swept around the hall as she found her table. "More people are looking at me than usual," she thought. "A lot more, but they don't seem happy with me." Madeline pulled Carolina's favorite chair out for her and pushed it in slightly as Carolina sat. She unfolded a napkin and placed it in Carolina's lap. Carolina waved her hand dismissively in the direction of the buffet of world-class gourmet food. "Go get me a plate, I'm starving. No carbs, no tomatoes, extra salt." "Yes, Miss Crawford," Madeline said deferentially and left her. Carolina looked at her phone, scrolling through her notifications on Instagram. The picture she posted in the Parisian gardens wasn't doing numbers as high as she expected. She made a mental note to buy more engaged followers. Glancing around, she was still being stared at, and it didn't seem to be in a good way. Why were so many people looking at her? And why were their expressions so unsettling? Did they know I poisoned that guy? Whatever his name was, Jerry? Greg? Carolina thought, starting to sweat. Maybe everyone's on guard against me. It could be good that they're afraid, or bad. She tapped a finger on her table. Maybe they're just jealous of me. Was it George? Olivia, Millie, Lena, and Wendy laughed gleefully about successfully framing Carolina as they climbed a staircase. Olivia finally had a little breathing room since they removed some of the murderous eyes boring into her back. She felt like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders, at least for the moment. They saw two figures descending the stairs toward them and slowed their pace. The girls nervously looked to Olivia for her reaction. The people walking towards them were Chris Jones and his muscle, Sven Jorgensen. There was an uncertain awkwardness between the two groups. They hadn't spoken since Chris and Sven violently retaliated against Mason Crawford and Carolina after Carolina had tried to kill Olivia. Chris cleared his throat. "Can I borrow Olivia from you all for a bit? If you're not in the middle of something?" Olivia's friends all looked to her for a reaction, taking her cue. Olivia nodded. "Yeah, I can spare a few minutes." Ugh, things were so good with Chris for a moment. Olivia thought to herself, I hate that it's been awkward between us again. At the same time, she didn't hate the idea that he wanted to talk to her. It felt good. She suddenly realized that she had really been missing him. Olivia's friends gave her stern, protective looks, though they all said some version of, "Okay, see you later." The message was clear. They'd have her back if she needed them, but they went on their way because she said it was okay. Chris took Olivia's hand, lacing his fingers between hers. Her heart fluttered. "Come with me," he said, leading her downstairs toward his room, with Sven trailing behind them. Chris took a turn down a different hall that led in another direction, not to his room. "Where are we going?" Olivia asked. "Hang on. I'll explain." He led her to an unfamiliar room on the ground floor's main hall. The room was very large and looked like it showcased many old weapons and pieces of furniture from the earliest days of the castle. Sven winked at Chris. "Chris, you handsome devil, I'll be right outside while you two talk. Let me know if you need anything." Chris nodded back at him as Sven backed out of the room, closing the doors behind him. "What is this place?" Olivia said, taking in a grand, ancient bed that had silk robes around it. It was the bedroom of the first Perrys who lived here, the nobility who built the castle. Each new Perry who owns the place seems to have their own preference for where they stay, so this one became a little museum to those first owners. But we're here because those ancient pervs soundproofed this place very well. Olivia smirked at this. Chris held his hands up around his mouth like a megaphone. "Sven!" he yelled. They both watched the door and waited for a beat. Sven did not open the door. Chris grinned and shrugged at Olivia with an expression that said, "What did I tell you?" Olivia raised her eyebrows, impressed. Chris continued, "So I thought this was a good place to have a conversation that can't be overheard." Olivia nodded. That logic made sense. But something felt distracting to her about being alone with Chris again in a soundproof room, and a bed well used by a powerful old noble couple. She pretended to be very focused on the antiques. "So what's going on, Chris? Did something bad happen?" "There will be assassins here at Royal Perry's estate soon from a crime syndicate called the Hunters. I need you to stay with me from now on for your own protection." Olivia, surprised, met Chris's gaze, but he looked dead serious. "Assassins? Am I their target because of the competition for the last knife?" I believe that's actually not the reason. From what I've been able to gather, they're in conflict with the Park family in Europe. Since you're a Park, they're after you too." Olivia sighed, taking this all in. She didn't expect another reason to pop up so soon for people to want her dead. Out of the frying pan and into the fire, she mused, internally grim. "Try to stay separate from your cousin Jed for now. He's in danger too," Chris urged. Olivia chewed the inside of her cheek. This was serious, but if it really came down to it, she had dangerous superpowers she could use to protect herself. Those assassins surely had encountered someone with her abilities before, and wouldn't know what was coming to them. But it was rare that she saw Chris speaking this seriously. Olivia realized the name Hunters was familiar. The Hunters are one of the 3 biggest crime syndicates in the world, she said in awe. "You have come across them before?" Chris asked. Then it hit Olivia where she knew them from, as well as why she should not have said anything. In her previous life, she overheard Pamela Cox and Mark DeLillo talk about the 3 biggest crime syndicates in the world that hired all the top-tier assassins: Pluto, the Hunters, and the Hatchet family. "Just in passing," she lied, trying to cover her reaction. "I wasn't sure if they were even real." Chris seemed to accept this, and Olivia exhaled, relieved. But she still wasn't clear about what was going on and why the Parks were a target. Grandfather Andrew's family is doing business in Europe. How do they offend a crime syndicate to the point the Hunters want to assassinate all of them? Chris mulled this question over, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not sure if I should share this, but what the hell. Duke Lee leads a mysterious gang in Europe and has been growing his territory by taking over smaller gangs in various countries." "Duke Lee, are you sure?" Olivia couldn't hide her surprise. She knew his family was involved in the underworld, but she didn't know he was operating at such a high level. Chris nodded. "I've been investigating him for more than a year. I'm not sure if he's in Pluto or just helping them, but Pluto and the Hunters are sworn enemies. So it's Duke Lee's relationship with the Parks that has put them in the Hunters' crosshairs. And unfortunately, you are now caught in them too." "It can't be true," Olivia trailed off, overwhelmed at this revelation. "I knew that the Park family does extensive business in Europe, and wouldn't have been surprised if there were relationships with organized crime to some degree. But getting involved so closely with Pluto seems extremely dangerous. Grandfather Andrew, how could he make that decision?" "I'm also investigating the details of that relationship," Chris replied. "But for the time being, you need to stay with me for the rest of the competition for the last knife. This is a hotbed of dangerous people who are all angry and have a lot to lose. It's like a lit fuse that someone's not just lighting, they're tossing a whole new stick of dynamite onto it." Olivia knew she could take care of herself, but liked the idea of Chris thinking that he was protecting her. She smiled. "Okay, thank you so much for looking out for me." Chris smiled back at her and raised his arms to hug her. "Don't worry. No matter what, I'll be by your side. As long as I'm around, you won't have to give any of this a second thought. Believe me, that'll be enough." Olivia let him hug her and enjoyed his strong arms wrapped around her and the warm feeling of his chest against her. But then she remembered something she had to address with Chris that she couldn't let fall by the wayside. "Did you choke Mason Crawford to threaten him? Bad enough that he had bruises?" "I was just warning him. Your life was in danger." "He didn't do anything, Chris." Olivia didn't step back from Chris, but she held her arms at her sides. "Mason didn't deserve what you did to him. I didn't like that." His arms were still around her, and Chris nodded. "Okay, I'm sorry. I was doing it on your behalf. I should have checked with you." Olivia leaned her head against Chris's chest. She could hear and feel his heartbeat. It was pulsing very fast. She closed her eyes and breathed him in. He rested his cheek against her head. She felt like liquid sunshine was filling her whole body, rising through the top of her head. She slid her hands around either side of his ribs and up the muscles on his back. They swayed there for a moment. Olivia wasn't even making a conscious decision to do so, but it felt right to her to run her hands down to the curve of his lower back. She pulled his waist toward him. She heard his breath catch in his throat. Chris was stunned. Did this mean... Olivia looked up at Chris. He gently touched his forehead to hers, and then their noses alongside one another. She felt his breath on her lips. They each nervously tried to steady their breath as each of their pulses sped up. Chris slid his fingers around either side of her neck, into her hair, cradling her head. Is this it? Am I ready? Olivia thought, nearly frantic but so happy. She was trembling. I am. I want this. The door opened and a woman's voice said, Miss Johnson? Olivia and Chris sprang apart. The woman, a maid, then yelped in surprise. Chris Jones dug his nails into his palm and tried to steady his breathing. Why was it so damn hard for him to get a single moment of romance with Olivia? She was his fiancée, for God's sake. He'd been courting her for a while now, and he could count the number of times he'd had the opportunity to kiss her on one hand. It was already frustratingly rare that Olivia would even let him get close enough to consider kissing her. And whenever the opportunity did arise, it seemed as though they were interrupted. If Chris had been the superstitious type, he would think there was some kind of higher power desperately trying to keep them apart. Or perhaps it was karma for some wrong he had committed in a past life. Whatever it was that made it so difficult for him to have a moment with Olivia, he wished it would take pity on him. The constant teasing was driving him insane. It was enough that every time he saw Olivia, he had to work to get her to warm up. And every time it was like starting from scratch. Now as they stood there, still dangerously close to one another, he saw the look of absolute shame and embarrassment on Olivia's face and cursed the person who had interrupted him in his mind. He knew that Olivia didn't have as much experience as he did. After all, growing up the way Chris Jones did, flying all over the world, and attending fancy parties from childhood on, all with very little adult supervision, he and his friends grew up fast, and he tended to lean on the comfort of others his age since his own family was seldom around. He knew Olivia hadn't grown up that way. She had been raised by a single mother and had been taught that modesty was one of the most important virtues a person could have. Olivia glanced anxiously at Chris, wondering what he was thinking at this moment. She had wanted to kiss him so badly, but as soon as she had heard someone enter, she had jumped back from him like he was some kind of vermin. She hoped that she hadn't hurt his feelings. She quickly dipped into his mind, eager to hear what he was thinking so that they could avoid a future misunderstanding. Sometimes I wish Olivia could be like the other girls I've been with, a little freer, a little less shy. Olivia heard Chris think, and her heart dropped into her stomach. Was that really how Chris felt about her? Did he wish she was just easy and carefree like all the other little rich girls he grew up gallivanting around with? If Olivia had continued to listen into Chris's thoughts, she would have heard him chastising himself for even having that thought. Of course, he was human, and he did have needs that sometimes took over his rational thinking. But at the end of the day, it was because Olivia was different from any girl he had ever met that he liked her so much. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," said the maid who had barged in on them. She was staring down at her feet, her face bright red, equally embarrassed by what she had walked in on. "It's fine. You interrupted nothing," Olivia clipped, straightening up into a more dignified posture. Chris glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. He thought she was just bashful. But was it possible that to Olivia, maybe a kiss between them really was just nothing? Despite Olivia's insistence that there was nothing to interrupt, the maid refused to make eye contact with either of the powerful young people standing in front of her. "The master of the house has requested Miss Johnson come to the grand ballroom. He has an announcement to make." The maid was practically whispering. "Okay, great," Olivia said, overly chipper as she tried to hide the fact that she had just heard Chris's thoughts about how he wished she was more like other girls. "I'm ready now." "If you'll just follow me, madam, I'd be happy to show you the way." The maid stepped aside, curtsying slightly and holding her arm out for Olivia to pass. Without looking back, Olivia skipped out of the room into the hall. The maid scurried behind her, shutting the door quickly and leaving Chris standing there alone. His heart still beat in his chest as he continued to process what the hell just happened. He let out a string of expletives, then turned and punched the wall. Suddenly, he heard the door reopen, and thinking that it must be Olivia coming back to say something to him, he turned on a dime, morphing his face from one of anger to something he hoped looked more neutral. But when the door opened all the way, he saw that it was not Olivia. Instead, it was Sven, standing there, smirking at him with one eyebrow cocked in a questioning manner. You doing okay, bud?" Sven had just caught the end of Chris's little freakout, but he knew his friend, and he knew that whatever had just happened, there was a good chance it had to do with Olivia. "I'm fine." Chris let his face fall, not worried about hiding his frustration from his friend. "Okay, then." Sven knew not to press Chris when he was upset, lest he lash out at him. "Well, I just came to let you know that everyone's gathering in the grand ballroom. Apparently, Royal Perry wants to make some kind of announcement. That guy really seems like the type who loves the smell of his own farts, am I right?" Sven hoped that he could get Chris to at least crack a smile. Sometimes joking around was the best way to get Chris out of his head. But whatever had happened, Chris was too deep in his feelings to laugh. "Got it," Chris said, turning around and taking a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. Sven waited a moment, staring awkwardly at his friend's back as he stood there silently breathing. "So, like now, or?" Chris took a final breath out, releasing all of his pent-up emotions, and turned to Sven. "Yep, let's go." Chris barged out of the room and Sven followed him, shaking his head and smirking at how sensitive Chris could be. As Chris and Sven entered the grand ballroom, they found that it was already teeming with guests. The room itself was at least twice as large as the grand hall, where Royal Perry had held the infamous welcome dinner. But it seemed to be much more crowded than any of the events hosted thus far. Chris scanned the room, recognizing most of the faces from the upper echelon of both New York and London high society. He was also less than thrilled to see multiple members of the Secret Hunter Society, the crime syndicate Chris was all too familiar with. Even Duke Lee, the young leader of his own gang of less than reputable characters, was in attendance. Chris quickly tried to avoid making eye contact with any of these people. Best not to draw attention to himself. Olivia had entered the grand ballroom only moments before Chris and Sven, and had found herself a seat between Wendy and Chef Theodore at a table near the front of the room. Her face was just starting to return to its normal color after the embarrassment of being walked in on with Chris had stained her cheeks bright red. As soon as Chris entered the large space, Olivia felt an almost gravitational pull towards him. She let her eyes linger a moment on him, but quickly averted her gaze as soon as he looked up in her direction. She could feel her cheeks reddening yet again. Chris saw Olivia look away from him and felt his heart race in angry determination. Enough of these games. He was starting to grow impatient. Without even waiting for Sven, Chris beelined straight for Olivia's table, quickly pulling out the empty chair next to his uncle Theodore. "Is this seat taken?" Chris did not wait for a response before making himself comfortable in the seat. He glanced at Olivia, but she refused to meet his eyes. "Good to see you, nephew." Chef Theodore clapped a hand on Chris's back. He could sense some tension between the boy and Olivia, and he selfishly hoped it would not get in the way of her performance. She had to remember the real reason she was here: to win the last knife. At the front of the grand ballroom, Royal Perry sat on a small stage, Carlton at his side. He stood and cleared his throat for the room to quiet down. It took a moment for him to gain command over the room, but with a final icy stare, he was able to completely silence the animated crowd. "My esteemed guests," he began, his face suddenly warm and inviting, "I welcome you all here to begin the challenge of winning my last knife. It is a pleasure and an honor to have you in my home." The crowd cheered, until with a single hand, Royal Perry demanded quiet once more. His face fell now, and his tone grew serious. "Now, I want to start by addressing some of the darkness that has unfortunately pervaded this otherwise joyous occasion." He looked through the crowd, sending shivers down the spines of everyone in attendance. "We, of course, must acknowledge the misfortune that befell my good friend Gordon O'Connor. May we all take a moment in silence for his memory." Royal Perry lowered his head for a mere millisecond before readdressing the crowd. Chris Jones scoffed. "That was heartfelt," he whispered, causing Chef Theodore to elbow his nephew in the ribs, shaking his head in a warning to the boy. "Many of you have also heard about the unfortunate food poisoning Carolina Crawford fell ill with earlier today," Royal Perry continued, causing a murmur through the crowd. Olivia immediately looked to Wendy, who stared back at her in shock. "I want to assure you that the two events were not at all related, nor was the rancid food Carolina consumed a product of this household." Royal Perry chuckled as if the idea that anything he served could make someone sick was laughable. Olivia studied the man. She didn't have to read his thoughts to know he was lying through his teeth. There was no way the incidents were not related. Mason had promised his friends that he would not let Carolina do anything to hurt Olivia. Would he possibly go so far as to poison his own sister? Royal Perry continued on in an upbeat tone. "I am pleased to let you all know that Carolina is currently at the finest hospital in all of France, and I am guaranteed she will make a full recovery." A smattering of applause rang through the crowd, although certainly less than Carolina would have liked had she been present. Now, despite our certainty that the incidents with Gordon and Carolina are unrelated, I do wish to say this. At this point, Royal Perry's face grew stone cold and his tone lowered into one much more threatening than before. "If I should find anyone involved in any sort of foul play under my roof, you will be punished to the utmost extent." He paused for dramatic effect, as the guests held their breath. "So, I dismiss you all now to take some time to think on whether you really do wish to stay here at the Perry Manor and play by my rules, or you may leave if you so choose." Royal Perry stared down his guests, daring them to make the right choice. Then, as if nothing even remotely sinister had occurred, he smiled warmly at his guests, clapping his hands together. "We shall meet back here in 1 hour, and the Feast of the Knife God will officially begin." The crowd hesitated a moment before breaking out into applause. None of them had been sure what the proper response was to such a roller coaster of emotions, but they were all now eager to leave this room at once and take the much-needed time to themselves. As soon as they were dismissed, Chris stood from his chair to make his way to Olivia. He was going to clear things up from earlier, whether she wanted to talk or not. Olivia saw Chris about to approach her, a look of determination in his eye. But before he had the chance, Chef Theodore clasped a hand around her wrist. "Olivia, this is a perfect opportunity to get some more one-on-one time with Royal." He stood, pulling Olivia to her feet, as he watched Royal Perry and Carlton slip through the crowd into a private stairwell. "Oh, all right." Olivia glanced again at Chris, curious about what he was planning to say to her. But Chef Theodore dragged her away from his nephew, pushing through the crowd to reach the Perrys. Olivia looked over her shoulder at Chris, feeling conflicted. Chef Theodore noticed and quickly pulled Olivia closer to him, lowering his voice. "Olivia, now is not the time to be distracted by silliness. You must stay focused on the goal." Chef Theodore's voice rang in her ears. He was right. She had to remember what she was here for. She turned her head and marched through the crowd with Chef Theodore. Behind her, Chris was about to pursue them, when a hand suddenly slithered around his bicep and a voice sounded, dangerously close to his ear. "Hello, Kay. Long time no see." Chris stiffened at the sound of the voice ringing in his ear. Nobody called him Kay except for a select few members of the Hunters. But even if she hadn't used his old moniker, he would recognize that voice anywhere. He turned slowly and found himself face to face with a woman in a long navy dress that clung to her like a second skin, her deep brown eyes flashing with a cunning reminiscent of a fox, and her long onyx hair shone in the dim light of the ballroom. "Kelly O." Chris regarded the woman in a monotone voice. "Long time no see." "Oh, please, call me Mantis." The woman smiled devilishly at Chris, revealing a set of perfectly white teeth behind her deep red lipstick. "For old time's sake." Hearing another one of the secret names the Hunters had given them sent a cold rush through his veins. He wouldn't be dragged back down. Not this time. Chris swallowed as the woman took a step closer to him, pressing herself against his body. "You know I've missed you since you left our little group." She traced a finger in lazy circles on Chris's chest. "You left us so abruptly. What happened?" She blinked up at Chris, pouting her lips seductively. "Actually, I'm getting married." Chris smiled down at Kelly. It was time to leave. "Married, really?" Kelly lilted, refusing to back down. "Well, I guess congratulations are in order. Let's go somewhere and celebrate." She purred in Chris's ear, carefully slipping her leg through the high slit in her dress and placing it in between his. Chris grabbed Shelley by the shoulders, stepping back to place a foot of space between them. "Sorry, Kelly. My marriage isn't like yours." Chris looked past Kelly to a tall, swarthy man who had been standing just feet behind Kelly this entire time. "Hello, Tahir." The man nodded at Chris. He was used to Kelly's ways and no longer even batted an eye at her. That's too bad," Kelly whispered seductively, trying to wiggle her way closer to Chris. "I guess if this fiancé of yours is the only thing standing in my way, I'll have to find some way to dispose of her." Chris's face turned cold and he grabbed Kelly by her wrists, yanking her towards him. Kelly let out an excited yelp, smiling wildly. Behind her, Tahir reached a hand into his jacket, ready to pull out his pistol if necessary, but kept still, waiting to see how this would play out. "You listen to me," Chris whispered in Kelly's ear. "You so much as touch a hair on her head and I will end you myself, you got that?" Kelly looked up at Chris, her eyes dancing. "Yes, boss," she cooed, causing Chris to grimace. He forcefully dropped her wrists, turning to walk away without a second look. Kelly watched Chris exit the ballroom, pouting for real this time. Kay really isn't as fun as he used to be. She turned to Tahir, holding out a hand. "Come on, Big Bear, let's go." He took her hand and she led him away from the spot. Once in the hall, Chris tried to navigate the large Perry Manor to figure out where Royal Perry's private office was. He had seen it before, but with all the twists and turns this home had, he was a bit turned around. He knew he had to find his uncle and Olivia before too much time elapsed, and things between them grew even more awkward. "Chris!" Sven called from the end of the hallway. Chris stopped to wait for his friend as he jogged towards him. "Looking for Olivia, I assume?" Sven teased, but Chris was in no mood for that. He turned and continued walking. "I'm trying to find Royal Perry's study. If you don't want to help me, then just leave me alone." Sven shook his head. He loved Chris, but his attitude this week was really starting to weigh on Sven. "Sven, would you please help me look for Royal Perry's office?" Sven asked facetiously, then sighed. "Anyways, you're going the wrong way, come on." Sven walked down the hall in the opposite direction. Chris let a small smile curl on his lips, then rushed to follow Sven. "Thank you," he said, embarrassed. Inside Royal Perry's office, Olivia and Chef Theodore sat across from Royal Perry. Carlton was no longer present. Presumably, he had run off to play video games or something equally childish. Olivia grimaced at the thought. They sat in high-backed library chairs, an oak coffee table in front of them that was covered with a proper English tea ceremony. "Well, Olivia, I must say I'm very impressed by you." Royal Perry beamed at the girl as she carefully poured out tea for both Royal Perry and Chef Theodore before filling her own cup. "Such an accomplished girl you are, and at such a young age." Olivia smiled demurely at the old man, and Chef Theodore grinned to himself. He was quite proud of how well Olivia was doing to impress Royal Perry. And to be both a member of the Johnson family and the Parks, that is something. Royal Perry's eyes flashed with greed. "Now, I must admit, I'm no fan of your grandfather, Jack, but the Parks were always exquisite in their behavior. That must be where you learned your good manners." Olivia bit the inside of her mouth. Although she too had a complicated relationship with her grandfather, she didn't like hearing anyone else disparage her family. "My mother instilled manners in me at a very young age," Olivia answered delicately. "Well, I don't want to pussyfoot around it anymore." Royal Perry clapped his hands on his knees and leaned forward. "Olivia, I think you would make an absolutely fantastic match for my son Carlton. And I must admit, I wouldn't mind having you as a daughter-in-law myself." Olivia tried to hide her shock. Was he asking her to marry his son? She opened her mouth to speak when a knock came at the door. "Come in," Royal Perry bellowed. He was in a jolly mood now and welcomed any guest who may want to join in on the beginnings of forming such an auspicious union. The door opened carefully, and Chris Jones and Sven entered. "Hello, Mr. Perry. Uncle, Olivia." Chris nodded to each of the members of this little meeting. "Oh, is this your nephew, no?" Royal asked Chef Theodore. "And he's brought a friend?" "Yes, Royal, this is Sven Jorgensen of the Jorgensen family," Chef Theodore added quickly, trying to give some legitimacy to the boys who so rudely interrupted them. Royal Perry's eyes lit up. "Well now, come take a seat, boys. You're just in time to hear the good news." Chris quickly took the empty chair next to Olivia before Sven could have a chance to. Sven rolled his eyes when he saw this, as if he would ever try to get between Chris and his girl. "What's the good news?" Chris asked as he sat down, hoping to catch Olivia's eye. "Royal Perry has just asked Olivia to join the Perry family," Chef Theodore explained. Chris looked at his uncle, confused. "As Carlton's wife," he clarified, willing his nephew not to make a scene. Chris instinctually looked straight at Olivia, who refused to make eye contact. A million thoughts were racing through her head, from how ridiculous the thought that she might agree to marry a stranger was, to how repulsive she found Carlton in the little time she knew him. But she knew it was important that she form an alliance with Royal Perry. If he took any disliking to her, she knew he would make it impossible for her to win his final knife. "So, Olivia, what do you say?" Royal leaned forward in his seat, anxious for her reply. Olivia cleared her throat, trying to ignore the intensity she felt from Chris's eyes boring holes in the back of her head. "Well, while I find that a very generous offer, I'm afraid I may be a bit too young to consider such things." Chris smirked. He knew Olivia had very strict rules when she would even consider getting married. He was her fiancé, and if she hadn't wanted to marry him yet, then she definitely didn't want to marry anyone else, right? Royal Perry let out a hearty laugh. "Oh, nonsense. The sooner we get the two of you married, the sooner we can begin to build the Johnson-Perry enterprise. Besides, you don't want to find yourself at 30, unmarried, with no suitors in sight." Olivia clenched her jaw. The idea that being 30 and unmarried was some kind of pox for a woman was such an archaic notion It made her stomach churn. But she forced a smile and continued to speak with an even tone. "Honestly, I'm not even sure if I believe in the institution of marriage," Olivia said calmly. "You know my parents are not married, and I believe they are both more successful because of it." She hoped that Royal Perry did not know the entire sordid backstory behind her parents' love story. Although she now believed it was good that her parents were each single, she knew that her father's marriage and inevitable divorce from Rachel had been highly gossiped about. Next to her, Chris began to sweat. He had always imagined a future where he and Olivia were together, married and happy with 1 or 2 children. And he had always believed that deep down, Olivia had wanted that too, even if she wasn't willing to admit it at this time. But now as he heard her speak against marriage with such conviction, he wondered if he had been wrong. No, he thought. She's just saying whatever she thinks is necessary to deter the specific marriage. After all, I've seen how Olivia looks at Carlton. I can already tell she despises him. Chef Theodore laughed this time, quickly trying to cover for Olivia. "Oh, Royal, you know how kids are these days, so independent." He smiled at Olivia, willing her to not say anything that might hurt her chances. "She just needs a bit of time to consider the arrangement, that's all. But I, for one, am all in favor for Olivia and Carlton joining in union." Chris straightened up in his seat and stared at his uncle. How could he say that when he knew that Olivia was engaged to Chris? How could he be so treacherous to his own family? It was clear that Chris had feelings for Olivia, and Chef Theodore was now so plainly disregarding them. Royal Perry smiled at Theodore. You're right. We'll give the girl some time to come to her senses. In the meantime, shall we toast to the future Mrs. Carlton Perry?" Royal winked at Olivia, and she felt her lunch threaten to come back up. But she kept a fake smile plastered to her face. Just as Royal was about to go over to his bookcase to grab a bottle of the fine Japanese whiskey, there was a knock at the door. A butler stuck his head in. "Excuse me, sir, but it is 5 minutes to the hour." Royal Perry looked up at the grandfather clock leaning against the wall. "Well, would you look at that?" He dismissed the butler, turning back to his guests. "I suppose it's time we make our way back to the ballroom. Let's see who amongst the invited have decided to stick around, shall we?" He grinned, baring his teeth like a crocodile. As the group exited the study, Sven lingered behind, waiting to confront Chef Theodore, who was taking his time saying goodbye to Royal Perry. When the man exited, Sven popped up from where he was waiting, startling Theodore. "What the hell was that?" Sven accused. Chef Theodore held a hand to his chest. "Excuse me, young man, but is that any way to talk to one of your elders?" Sven, ignoring him, continued onward. "You know Chris has feelings for Olivia. Your nephew has feelings for the girl, and you pull a stunt like that?" "I have no idea what you're talking about." Chef Theodore began to make his way down the hall. He had no time to argue with teenagers. "You know that Chris and Olivia are engaged," Sven hissed, following right behind Theodore. Chef Theodore stopped and chuckled as he looked Sven directly in the eyes. "Of course. For now." Inside the grand ballroom, the crowd buzzed with excitement. It seemed that everyone who had been there earlier had decided to stay, surprising and delighting Royal Perry. Although he was certain there were some guests still here who would insist on playing dirty, he secretly loved the drama and was hoping they'd put on a good show. As soon as all the guests were seated, Royal lifted his hand, signaling to his servants to close off the room. The heavy wooden doors closed all at once with a large bang that sent a hush over the entire room. "I am so glad to see you have all decided to stay and play by my rules." Royal Perry scanned the crowd as he spoke. "There are going to be 3 stages in total for this competition. Tonight, we begin the first." Everyone looked around nervously. They knew that despite what Royal Perry had said during his announcement earlier, He did not care whether they lived or died. I have hidden knives around the estate. Some of them are decoys, but 10 of these knives carried the official Perry crest carved into their handle. Your goal is to find one of these knives and return it to this very room within 2 hours' time from our start. A murmur went through the crowd. Only 10 knives and hundreds of contestants present? No one had realized how terrible the odds would be from the very start. You will partner up with someone you believe to be the best equipped to handle this challenge. I would advise all of you to put your personal feelings aside. Olivia fought the urge to look towards Chris. Royal Perry was right. She had to be strategic. At the end of the 2 hours, I will lock the doors to the ballroom, and anyone who hasn't brought one of my authentic knives into this room will be officially disqualified from the competition. Royal glanced over at a regal-looking clock on the wall. It is now 4.5 minutes to our starting time. You will have this time to find your partner. Good luck. Immediately, the room burst out into a frenzy of shouts and shoves, people screaming out names as they frantically searched for the person they believed would be the best. Olivia stayed seated, running through all the options in her head. There was Lena. Her intense thirst for gaming could make her a valuable asset. She had certainly played games before where she had to search for things. And then there was Millie. While she could be sensitive, she was also one of the most rational thinkers Olivia knew. She would be able to keep them on track and not fall for purposeful distractions or tricks. Of course, Chris Jones was always an option. Olivia felt her stomach harden into a rock when she thought of him. No, that's exactly why she couldn't pair up with him. Although he had everything a good partner would need to win the competition, Olivia couldn't risk her feelings getting in the way. Half of the time she was with Chris, her brain went fuzzy, and she did and said things she would never do normally. Then her eyes landed on Jeremy. She remembered their time in San Francisco, how strategic he could be, and how calm he was able to stay even in the face of immense pressure. Across the room, Chris pushed through the crowd to make his way towards Olivia. Not only would they make a killer team, but this would be the perfect opportunity to talk to her about what had happened between them. But just as he got close to where Olivia sat, he saw her stand and move across the room. He watched in stunned silence as Olivia approached Jeremy. She said something to him quietly, and he blushed, nodding his head in agreement. What the hell was this? Jeremy whispered something in Olivia's ear, and she let out a coquettish laugh. Chris clenched his fists in anger. Was he really just a joke to Olivia? Someone she could play with when she was bored, then toss aside whenever it wasn't convenient for her? Sven came up from behind Chris and clasped a hand around his shoulder. So, partners? Chris nodded solemnly, never taking his eyes off Olivia. Over by Olivia and Jeremy, Olivia avoided looking in Chris's direction. She knew he would be disappointed she hadn't chosen him, and she knew her relationship with Jeremy would cause him even more stress. But despite whatever she may be feeling, this choice really wasn't personal. Jeremy, on the other hand, felt lighter than he had in months. He couldn't believe Olivia had chosen him over everyone else in the room. He felt his heart flutter, and the crush he had worked so hard to tamp down began to resurface. Millie and Lena lingered near Olivia, also trying to decide on their partners. Lena looked slightly forlorn, and Millie assumed it was because Francis had not asked her immediately to team up. She looked over towards Francis and saw that he was alone, hunched over the table he sat at, sulking away. "Do you want to be my partner, Millie?" Lena asked despondently. At that moment, Francis stood, making his way through the crowd in a lazy attempt to find someone himself. Actually, I think I should pair up with someone else." Millie strategically pretended to bump into Lena, just as Francis was passing them, knocking her friend into the boy. "Oops, my bad." Francis caught Lena, stabilizing her and smiling. Then, remembering what he had seen between her and Carlton earlier, his smile faded. Millie, watching this, decided to step in. I know. Why don't you two team up? Millie enthusiastically nodded at Lena. You both know so much about games. I'm sure the two of you would kill this competition. Frances and Lena looked at each other, each trying to hide the longing they felt in their hearts. I guess she has a point, Frances shrugged. Lena thought Frances seemed off. He was more withdrawn than normal. Yeah, we could be a team, I suppose, Lena agreed, trying to see if she could glean anything from his reaction. He nodded noncommittedly, avoiding her gaze. Millie smiled to herself on her well-played matchmaking. But then she saw another situation she had to rectify. Just a few yards away, Steve was making his way towards Wendy, who looked around helplessly for an exit from the situation. Before he had a chance to reach Wendy, Millie swooped in, linking her arm through Steve's and pulling him away. Steve, will you partner with me? Millie tried to redirect him so they were no longer in Wendy's path. I'm smart enough, but I have no upper body strength. It would be good to team up with someone strong like you. Steve glanced back at Wendy longingly. I'm not sure. I was maybe going to... Millie cut him off, turning him so he had to look her in the face. Steve, listen to me. I know you like Wendy, but this isn't the way. Steve's face turned bright red. He hadn't realized how obvious he was being in his intentions. You have to give her space to come to you, Millie continued. Trust me, I know girls and I know Wendy. Now come on, let's strategize. Millie smiled and led Steve off. He couldn't help but glance back at Wendy one last time before letting Millie drag him away. Millie and Steve passed Camilla and Cameron as they tried to find a quiet corner to talk. Cameron stared at Millie as she passed, a sudden loathing for Steve building up in his body. Camilla noticed her brother staring and pinched his arm. Don't even think about it, she warned. Cameron glared at his sister and rubbed the spot she had just pinched. He was sick of his sister controlling him. Wendy stood in the sea of people, all starting to pair off, and sighed. Even though she couldn't imagine being paired up with Steve for something like this, she felt a kind of sadness to be alone now. Dusty spotted Wendy from across the room and came up to her. Looks like we're both flying solo still. Wendy smiled up at him sadly. I guess so. Well, I say we pair up then. Dusty tipped his chin down, looking at the girl with empathy. Or we could just call it off and go find a window with a view and watch all the madness like the best reality show in the world. Wendy giggled, then looked over at Olivia and Jeremy, who were deep into planning. Now let's play. What do we have to lose, right? That's the spirit. Dusty slapped his knees for emphasis. But if we somehow find a knife, which I very much doubt will happen, Wendy continued, let's agree that we'll give it to Olivia, okay? Hey, I've got more than enough knives at home already. Dusty smirked, and Wendy laughed again, feeling better already. 30 seconds left. Royal Perry boomed out over the crowd. Everyone began to move around the space, frenzied. Those who were already paired scrambled to come up with last-minute strategies, and those who weren't paired began frantically searching for a partner. Royal began to count down the seconds. 10, 9, 8. The crowd became a mob, pushing and shoving to put the pieces together before it was too late. 3, 2, 1. Royal Perry rang a bell that echoed loudly through the hall, signifying that the time was up. If you have not found a partner, please make your way to the exits and our staff will escort you to the viewing rooms. A group of dismayed-looking people began to shuffle away towards the exit, regarding each other with contempt for not having chosen one another when they had the chance. The rest of you, line up in your pairs. Olivia grabbed Jeremy's hand and pulled him in line. She looked around, surprised by some of the pairs she saw. She had thought that perhaps Millie and Lena would skip the games, since neither of them had an interest in Knife God's final knife. But now she saw them clearly standing there, paired up with Steve Shook and Frances, respectively. Olivia grinned to herself, knowing this was Millie's handiwork, teaming up Lena and Frances, and most likely bogarting Steve so that she could help her friend Wendy. As she glanced around at all of the teams, Olivia couldn't help but pass over Chris and Sven. Luckily, Chris did not catch her staring, but that was only because his gaze was locked on her hand, intertwined with Jeremy's. Almost as if it were a knee-jerk reaction, Olivia dropped Jeremy's hand. She smiled up at him reassuringly, as if to say not to take it personally. But in so many ways, it was personal for her. "At the sound of the bell, I will open the doors and you may begin your search," Royal Perry announced, searching for his bell. He lifted it in the air, dragging out the moment and enjoying the faces of agony and anticipation. Finally, he rang the bell, and his butlers quickly opened the door. The teams rushed forward, pushing and prodding to be the first ones out. Olivia and Jeremy stayed back. They had already discussed a strategy, and they knew speed would play only a very small role in this competition. Royal Perry was too clever to make this anything but a challenge of wits. Chris and Sven sidled up next to them, apparently in agreement that speed would not help them win. Chris sneered at Jeremy, and Olivia swallowed. "Good luck," she offered, but Chris ignored her, stepping forward to make his exit. "You too." Steve smiled tightly at Olivia before joining his friend. "Hey," Jeremy offered his hand to Olivia. "Don't worry about them. Just focus on how good it's going to feel to find one of those knives." Olivia hesitated for a moment. She had to admit, more than anything, she wanted to win. She reached out and took Jeremy's hand, and the two of them made their way out of the grand ballroom. "It's showtime," Olivia said. She was not going to lose. After the mad dash of the contestants leaving the ballroom, Royal Perry found Chef Theodore still seated at his table. "What fun to see all these young people so excited for the event," Royal said, offering his arm to the man. Chef Theodore took the man's arm, standing up slowly from his seat. "You've got quite the competition brewing here, Royal." Royal smiled smugly, proud of the chaos he had created. "Come, I must show you my special private viewing room." Royal led Chef Theodore out of the grand ballroom as they chatted. Carlton followed behind them, busy playing a game on his Switch, utterly bored by the entire week. Royal led Chef Theodore up a secret staircase to a room no one would even suspect existed, based on the architecture of the house. Inside, the walls were covered in screens, all showing different parts of the house, inside and out, in real time. "Well, I'll be." Chef Theodore marveled at the extreme surveillance his friend had set up. "You can see everything." "Well, not quite everything," Royal chuckled. "Despite my better judgment, I have left a modicum of privacy for my guests. There are no cameras in the bedrooms or wash closets, but every public area of the house is completely visible." Chef Theodore squinted at the screens, watching the teams of competitors rush around the manor like little ants. His eyes fell on Olivia, rushing down a hallway on an upper floor, hand in hand with one of the Garibaldis. Chef Theodore thought to himself, an interesting choice. He was glad she had taken his warning about distraction seriously, clearly staying away from his fair-weathered nephew. However, Chef Theodore raised an eyebrow as he watched the Garibaldi boy lead Olivia into his bedroom, checking over his shoulder before closing the door behind them. Chef Theodore let out a sigh. Hopefully, this boy would not turn out to be yet another distraction. The first thing Olivia and Jeremy had decided to do when they left the grand ballroom was to rush to Jeremy's room and gather some of his high-powered equipment. He was certain he'd be able to quickly jury-rig a device that allowed them to seek out deposits of high-carbon stainless steel, a material which Knife God's knives were famous for. "I just need to connect this sensor to this screen, and we should be good." Jeremy leaned over his many devices, carefully tinkering as Olivia watched him. "Let me know if there's anything I can do to help." Olivia let her eyes wander the room, exploring Jeremy's items he had chosen to bring with him to Paris. She landed on a stack of books next to his bed. He had brought a bunch of classics with him. Hemingway, Baldwin, and Dickens. She smiled to herself as she read the titles, recognizing a pattern. All of the novels took place in Paris. She looked back at Jeremy with fondness. There was something so sweet and innocent about his choice of books. She imagined him as he packed for trips, carefully putting together collections of stories that took place in the city he would be visiting, so that he might fully immerse himself. Olivia forgot how much she admired Jeremy. She wondered why they didn't spend more time together. All right, and done. Jeremy flipped a switch on the device, and it began to emit a beeping sound. Yes, it works. Jeremy looked up at Olivia and found her already gazing down at him. Meeting her eyes, he immediately blushed. What, do I have something on my face? He began to rub at his cheeks. Olivia laughed. No, I'm just glad we paired up, that's all. Jeremy felt butterflies immediately swarming in his stomach. He gulped, trying to regain his composure before standing. So, shall we? He held the device out nervously to Olivia to show her how it worked. Let's do this. Olivia took the device, still smiling warmly at Jeremy in a way that made his insides feel like mush. Okay, so according to this, the places the machine is picking up the highest concentration of steel are the library, the cellar, and the garden. Jeremy squinted at the glowing red markers on the map he had uploaded of the manor. But there are 10 knives total, Olivia pointed out. Why is it only showing 3 possibilities? It's not a perfect system. Jeremy shrugged. If one of the knives is hidden in a denser metal or behind some kind of concrete, I doubt the sensor would be able to pick that up. Olivia looked at the screen once more, then at her surroundings. Right now, they stood in the foyer of the manor, and everywhere she looked, people were rushing around, hunting for the knife. Let's look outside, Olivia whispered. It seemed everyone was too scared to be out in the cold, dark, with a possible murderer on the loose. But since Olivia knew it was Carolina Crawford who had killed that man, and she was currently in the hospital, Olivia felt safe exiting the premises. Olivia swiftly made her way toward the exit, hoping not to draw too much attention to themselves. Outside, Olivia and Jeremy followed the sensor toward the spot it indicated might be the location of one of the knives. They walked in silence, the sounds of the quiet night air deafening around them. Finally, Jeremy spoke up. You know, Chris Jones would probably be the best choice for a competition like this. Oh yeah, you think? Olivia stuffed her hands into the pocket of her coat. She was glad it was too dark out to see the blush that was creeping across her cheeks. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm glad you chose me. Jeremy hesitated, nervous to continue on. But why did you? Olivia looked up at Jeremy, unsure how to answer. Unbeknownst to Olivia and Jeremy, they were being followed. About 20 feet behind them, Chris Jones and Sven stalked quietly behind them, careful not to be spotted. Chris could give a damn about winning the competition, but he would never forgive himself if something happened to Olivia while she was with that little nerd Jeremy. Up ahead, Olivia and Jeremy stopped, checking their location against the sensors. Sven and Chris dodged behind one of the many animal-shaped topiaries that decorated the immense garden. So why did she choose Jeremy over you? Sven whispered. The hell if I know. Chris peeked out at Olivia from behind the hedge. His anger was building every time he saw Jeremy step closer to her. Just then, they saw Olivia and Jeremy begin to move again. Let's go. We can't lose them. Chris snuck out from behind the topiary, followed by Sven. Olivia and Jeremy looked around them, puzzled. The system says it should be right here, Jeremy whispered. At this point, other teams using similar technology to the machine Jeremy had rigged had found their way out into the garden. Luckily, it seemed that they were also having a difficult time locating the knife. Olivia sighed. I guess we'll just have to find it the old-fashioned way. She began scanning the ground with her eyes. You go that way, I'll go this way. Jeremy nodded and walked off in the opposite direction, still occasionally glancing at the screen in his hand, refusing to give up on his device. Olivia was starting to feel hopeless. It was so dark, and the grounds were enormous. The chances of them ever finding a knife out here seemed impossible. Just then, Olivia noticed a flash of something out of the corner of her eye. She squinted, not believing her own sight. Is that a rabbit? Olivia thought she must be seeing things. In the distance was the largest rabbit she had ever seen. That can't be real, she thought. Nevertheless, Olivia's curiosity was piqued. She wandered towards the rabbit hesitantly, but as she got closer, she realized it was only a very realistic topiary, cut to look like a common country bunny. Just as Olivia was about to turn around, she noticed a glimmer in the ground. She kneeled and saw it, a knife handle perfectly carved with the Perry crest. She gasped involuntarily, drawing the attention of a few passerby. She quickly tried to act as if she had merely been gasping at the beauty of the topiary. Once the attention seemed to be off of her, Olivia attempted to pull the knife out of the ground, but it wouldn't budge. Olivia looked over her shoulder for Jeremy and spotted him a few yards away. "Jeremy!" she called, once again catching the attention of others around them. "You have to come see this topiary. It's so lifelike." Picking up on the strained tone in Olivia's voice, Jeremy rushed over. He kneeled down next to Olivia, and she pulled his eyes towards the knife with her own. Jeremy almost gasped himself when he saw it, but he restrained himself. "Wow." He raised his voice to an almost comedic level. "This really is a beautiful topiary." Behind them, hidden in the shadows, Chris Jones scoffed. "Please, he's being so obvious. Why not just shout that they found a knife?" Sven watched the two as they struggled to pull the knife out of the ground. "Should we help them?" "Not yet. Better not to draw any more attention to them." Chris secretly wanted to watch a while longer. He enjoyed seeing Jeremy struggle. Up in the viewing room, Royal Perry and Chef Theodore were glued to the screen that showed Jeremy and Olivia. "Well done, Theodore." Royal Perry clapped a hand on his back. "Your girl has done you proud." Chef Theodore looked on proudly. "I always knew she could do it. I have the utmost faith in Olivia." Royal Perry chuckled almost cruelly. "Yes, well, finding the knife is the easy part. It's getting it back that is the real challenge." "Let's try to pull it together," Olivia whispered, watching Jeremy struggle to get the blade to loosen from the hard earth. She wrapped her hands around the handle so that they were pressed against Jeremy's. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Olivia and Jeremy pulled with all of their strength, falling backward as the soil finally gave way. They inhaled sharply when they saw how long the knife was. They had planned to hide it in Olivia's coat to safely make their way back to the ballroom. But this thing was massive. There was no way they could make it back unseen. "What do we do?" Olivia panicked, both of them staring at the knife dumbfounded. A few feet away, a woman from another team noticed them, craning her neck to see what they were up to. "Just put it behind your back." Jeremy pushed the knife towards Olivia. "Quick!" Olivia hid the knife behind her back as best she could, but it was too late. "They found one! They found one!" the woman shouted to her partner, drawing the attention of everyone outside. Suddenly, Olivia and Jeremy found themselves surrounded by an angry mob of competing teams. "Give us the knife, kid," one of them shouted. "Stay back," Jeremy threatened, but his shaking hands gave him away. "Or you'll what?" A man much older and stronger than Jeremy sneered. He made to take a step closer, and Olivia closed her eyes, concentrating all her energy. If she were ever going to use her powers, this would be the time. She focused on the man's foot as he took a step, almost as in slow motion. Suddenly, the man went flying back, landing on his butt as if he had been tripped by a rope. "Charles!" His teammate quickly came to his side to check on him. Olivia smiled to herself, but even that small move had drained her energy quite a bit. She knew she'd never be able to take on the whole crowd. "I'm warning you!" Jeremy's voice wavered as the crowd closed in on them. "Or you'll do what?" Another adult scoffed. "We're not all as clumsy as that oaf." Olivia felt herself start to panic. She closed her eyes, trying to concentrate once again, but suddenly she heard a voice from behind her. "Or you'll have to deal with us." Olivia opened her eyes and saw Chris Jones and Sven standing there, smirking confidently at the crowd. Of course, everyone knew who these two were, being from the most powerful families in the U.S., but they'd also heard rumors about the less-than-legal activities these two were infamous for. The man from before stepped forward, his confidence faltering now. "So what? Are you going to pull out a gun on us? Royal Perry said no foul play or you'll be disqualified." That is true, isn't it, Chris?" Sven smirked at his friend. "Yeah, that's too bad. My buddy Sven here is one of the sharpest shots I've ever seen. Aren't you?" Chris raised an eyebrow. "Oh, well, thank you, Chris. I'm flattered." Sven pretended to be bashful. "I guess we could let these fine folks take the knife now." Sven turned back to the man. "The competition only lasts for another hour. We can meet back up afterward and see how you like to play without the rules." The man cowered as Sven smiled deviously at him. His skills with the rifle were well documented. In fact, there were rumors that some of the best-known crime syndicates were watching Sven as a possible hire for their team of assassins. "There's still 9 other knives, right, guys?" the man called over his shoulder, scared to take his eyes off of Sven. The others behind the man nodded nervously, quickly scattering into the night. As soon as they all cleared away, Jeremy and Olivia sighed in relief. "Come on, we'll escort you back." Sven began to lead the way, and Jeremy eagerly followed, wanting to be in his protection. Once they were a few steps behind, Olivia turned to Chris. "Thank you. That was really brave of you." Chris stared straight ahead as they walked. "I don't want your thanks," he snarled, surprising Olivia. "I just want to know why you picked that guy over me." Olivia forced herself not to smile. Was Chris Jones actually jealous? "Huh, wow, okay." Olivia rolled her eyes at Chris's demand to know why she had picked Jeremy as her competition partner instead of him. His timing to confront her about this couldn't have been worse, but it was nice to see him rattled and making embarrassing decisions. Looks like Chris Jones is capable of feeling a little jealous after all, even if he is too proud to admit it. Olivia kept herself from smirking. "We'll talk about this later. We need to be focused on the competition right now," she said firmly. "Let's head back together." Her tone was annoyed, but the truth was that she was pleased to see Chris jealous. Her decision to pick Jeremy was a completely strategic one, and had nothing to do with her romantic preference. Having Chris as her partner would have been too emotionally risky. She did not know how Chris would react. He could seem very attached to her one minute, and completely unreadable and aloof the next. Deep down, even though it was strictly business, she had hoped Chris might be a little jealous. And here he was, pouting that she didn't pick him. It was reassurance that she meant something to him. It wasn't the easiest or kindest way to take the temperature of how he felt, but it was something. Chris sighed and shook it off. "Okay, fine." Olivia was right. This wasn't exactly the time to have this conversation when they were in danger and fighting against a ticking clock. He didn't mean to reveal how much it bothered him that she chose Jeremy. It had just slipped out. He still couldn't imagine why she wouldn't pick him. Did someone put her up to it? It was a confusing and petty thing to do. But now I look like the immature one for asking about it, he thought, embarrassed. He breathed slowly to keep his frustration under control. He remembered that the most important thing for him was to protect Olivia, and it would be a lot harder to do that if he argued with her right then. He maintained his composure and cooperatively followed behind Olivia. Jeremy observed Olivia and Chris's interaction and frowned slightly. He had enjoyed having Olivia's attention as her competition partner, and the idea that she might even be into him was fun. Did they really have to throw a cold bucket of water all over the situation so soon? Realizing Olivia isn't actually interested in me is disappointing enough. but you guys can't even let me enjoy the fantasy just a little longer? Sven read the disappointment on Jeremy's face and felt a mix of amusement and pity. He playfully put his arm over Jeremy's shoulder. "It'll be okay, buddy," Sven teased. It was too bad for Jeremy, but seeing Chris's unflappable front finally crack a little was refreshing. Jeremy rolled his eyes and followed the others without saying anything. Meanwhile, a group of other competitors hurried through a garden full of rose bushes and fountains, past a few large trees. As their voices disappeared into the distance, a face silently peered out from around the tree. It was Millie. "Are they all gone?" Steve whispered from behind the other tree, where Millie had just emerged. "I think so," Millie answered. She looked down at the short, beautifully crafted knife in her hands that they had found. "We need to hide that thing." Steve eyed the knife warily. Then his eyes brightened with an idea. "Hide it in your clothes." "And how do you suppose I do that?" Millie snapped. "In one of my many knife pockets?" She gestured sarcastically at her outfit, which was not at all suited for carrying anything. "I don't know, don't girls have secret compartments in their purses and clothes? Like putting cash and phones in your bras or something?" "It's a knife, Steve," Millie snapped. "How about we put it in your underpants?" "It was just an idea. I don't have anywhere to put it. I didn't even wear a belt to this. My strategy was to dress comfortably," Steve explained. Millie looked down at her waist and placed the knife in her belt. She tightened it so that it was secure, then untucked her oversized blouse so that it covered her belt and the knife. She shook her head at Steve. "You are such an idiot." "Shh, they're gonna hear us." Steve held up his hand pleadingly. "Let's get out of here." "Okay," Millie grumbled and followed him. "How did you know there would be a knife in that spot?" Steve whispered. "I just used my brain. You should get one sometime." Millie snipped. Steve bristled but kept his mouth shut. I'd call her a nerd, but people are proud of that nowadays. They carefully walked along when a voice suddenly called out, "Where's the knife?" Millie and Steve froze. Several other competitors had caught up to them. Thinking quickly, Millie threw up her hands and pretended to wipe tears from her eyes. "Someone took it," she wailed. The other pair looked at each other. "Who took it?" one of them demanded. Millie spotted a man and a woman walking together in the far distance and saw the glint of a knife in his hand. Millie pointed at them and dramatically cried, "They took it!" Everyone turned to see where Millie pointed. "Hey, they've got knives!" one of them cried. "After them, let's go!" They ran after the unsuspecting man and woman. "That was lucky." Steve breathed a sigh of relief. "Come on." Millie waved him on in the direction back to the Perry castle. After walking for some time, they were about halfway to the castle when they crossed paths with Olivia, Chris, Jeremy, and Sven. "Did you guys get a knife?" Millie grinned excitedly. "We did. What about you? Did you find one?" Olivia asked. "Ta-da!" Millie pulled the small knife from under her belt to show it to Olivia. "Good thing I wore a belt today." Millie smirked. Olivia looked at the knife. "Steve, you made Millie carry it the whole time?" "She's the brains, not me. Ask her." Steve crossed his arms defensively. Olivia felt how light Millie and Steve's short knife felt in her hand compared to the big, heavy one she found. "Don't you want to know where we found it?" Steve grinned. "Let me guess. Millie found it," Olivia said dryly. Then she added internally, "Millie would have been a good choice. She's very clever." "Why do you think that? How do you know I didn't find it?" Steve asked, offended. "Well, she has a brain." Olivia paused and looked up at Steve. "And you don't." The girls had a good laugh about that. "Ha ha, did you and Millie come up with that one together or something?" Steve complained. Millie smiled teasingly at Steve and linked her arm with Olivia's. "We better head back." "Okay," Olivia nodded. They all made their way back to the castle together. Along the way back, other people saw that Olivia, Millie, Steve, Jeremy, Chris, and Sven had 2 knives between them. As envious and competitive as everyone was, the combination of seeing this particular group of power players together was just too intimidating for anyone to try to take them on. Most of the other competitors chased, grabbed, and even beat each other up, trying to take each other's knives. They took desperate measures as if their lives depended on it. While all the other competitors tore each other apart, Olivia, Millie, Steve, Jeremy, Chris, and Sven enjoyed a slow, pleasant walk, talking and laughing together all the way back. Their combined power gave them the privilege of protection. All was quiet enough that Olivia could hear their footsteps crunch softly on the fallen leaves. After all this build-up, this competition is actually kind of relaxing. Olivia smiled to herself. Suddenly, the sound of a gunshot rang out and ripped through the quiet. Everyone froze in stunned silence. "That sounded like a gunshot," Chris said. Olivia turned to look in the direction of the gunshot sound. Her eyes searched the clusters of other competitors. "Oh no," she thought. "Where are Wendy and Lena? I haven't seen them this whole time." Olivia's stomach dropped and her heart went cold. She had a very bad feeling. "Come on," Olivia said as she hurried toward where the noise came from. Millie nodded and they all followed after Olivia. "Please let Wendy and Lena be okay." In the distance, Olivia saw a circle of people surrounding 2 familiar individuals. Olivia's heightened senses allowed her to smell blood in the air. Her eyes widened in fear as she recognized Wendy and Dusty were the ones surrounded by the menacing group. She broke into a run toward them. "Stay back!" Wendy cried. She was not one to ever be vicious or try to show dominance, but this was do or die. Both of Wendy's hands wrapped around a knife with a carved willow handle. She trembled, but stood her ground, and her eyes filled with determination. "I will fight if I have to," Olivia heard Wendy shout in her mind. Dusty was behind Wendy, and he looked to be already wounded. Bright red blood seeped from the bullet hole in his shoulder. Dusty had been shot, Olivia realized. She watched the blood drip down his arm and onto the ground. This was very bad. Olivia ran towards the crazed circle as it closed in on Wendy and Dusty. "Wendy!" Olivia shouted. Wendy's head snapped in Olivia's direction. "Olivia!" she called back. Hope flooded through her, and she felt braver now that the others were here. She glared at the one who still pointed the gun right at them. Olivia's eyes locked onto their attacker. He was a young man, probably not even 20 years old. His eyes stared coldly at Wendy and Dusty as he gripped the gun and his finger hovered over the trigger. When he noticed Olivia, he scowled with disdain. "Who is that guy?" Olivia whispered. "I recognize him. He's from one of the 4 great ancient families," Steve answered in a low voice. "Jason Goodwin of the Goodwin family." "Great? Look at him. How great could he be?" Olivia asked skeptically. "They're extremely wealthy," Sven added. "Not quite as much as the Jones family, but you get the idea." "Got it," Olivia nodded. She ran out to put herself between Jason's gun and Wendy. "Get out of here!" Jason yelled at Olivia, but she ignored him. "You're not going to shoot me because it would be the biggest mistake of your life," Olivia calmly said to Jason. "Olivia!" Chris yelled to her. "What does she think she's doing?" "Trust me," Olivia answered firmly. Jason scowled at Olivia but did not pull the trigger. Olivia looked around at the crowd that had gathered to encircle them. All of these people look so normal, other than the fact that they're about to try and assault someone, or worse, over a competition. A man has already been shot, and none of these people even care. All these rich, respectable-looking people can just turn into violent monsters the second they really want something. I guess I should be familiar with that concept by now. "What happened?" Olivia asked Wendy. Behind her, Dusty held his bleeding arm and breathed heavily. Wendy gulped fearfully and explained, "We found the knife. Jason and his friends here found us and wanted to take the knife by force. Dusty knew there were too many of them for us to fight back. so he wanted to just give it to them so I wouldn't get hurt. Dusty was about to hand over the knife, and he shot Dusty anyway." Wendy bit her lip, and Olivia couldn't tell if it was out of fear or anger. Probably both. Wendy tightly held onto Olivia's arm for support. Olivia looked back at Jason and the barrel of the gun he had pointed right at them. "How dare you?" Olivia thought, seething at Jason and the loaded gun in his hand. It's one thing to threaten your competition into getting what you want, but to trick them and shoot Dusty anyway? When he was about to give you the knife, it's absolutely evil. If I had my way, I would end this little worm of a man right now with just a twist of my hand. But there are too many witnesses. "That's not true," Jason insisted, dismissing Wendy's accusation with a smug tone. "I did not shoot him before he gave me the knife." "Then how do you explain this?" Dusty gestured at the bleeding bullet wound in his arm. "Technically, yes, I shot you, but it wasn't on purpose. The gun went off by accident. It happens all the time, you all understand." Jason appealed to the group. "No, I don't. I don't walk around casually carrying guns to threaten or accidentally hurt people with," Olivia exclaimed. "By accident?" Wendy shrieked. Jason's words infuriated her so much that she stomped her foot on the ground. "He's lying. It was not an accident. He really has no shame," she marveled. "You have to believe me and Dusty." "It's your word against all of ours," Jason said. He glared threateningly at all the other witnesses in the circle. They all nodded. Olivia looked into Jason's thoughts. "I'm Jason Goodwin, of the Goodwin family. No one would dare take anyone's word over mine. I can shoot whoever I want if they're in my way, and no one can do a thing about it." Olivia heard Jason's voice in her head. Of course he was lying, and he's not even very good at it, Olivia thought. She reached out and took the knife from Wendy's hand and squeezed her shoulder to comfort her. "I'll handle this," she whispered to Wendy. "Let me do the talking." "How much could it really cost to patch up this bodyguard, or even get a whole new one? Name your price, and I'll pay for it in full." "My gun misfired. My bad. My apologies," Jason said nonchalantly as he lowered the gun. Olivia listened to Jason's thoughts again. "And this is Wendy? I heard rumors about the long-lost granddaughter of Chef Rory Chang was in this competition. The way everyone talks about her, I was expecting more. She just looks like any other young girl. I'd still hit it and quit it, though," Jason thought. Olivia heard Jason's wildly disrespectful thoughts and was filled with rage. She did her best to keep herself under control as she stared him down. "How dare you attack Chef Chang's granddaughter? You're pretty bold to do something like that. A lot of people would even say it's incredibly stupid." "That's ridiculous," Jason scoffed. "Everyone here saw that I obviously didn't shoot anyone. And look at Wendy. She's fine." Olivia laughed darkly. "Huh, you call this fine? Her bodyguard is seriously wounded, and you were pointing a gun at her until I stepped in? At a minimum, you owe a lot more than money. How much are you willing to pay?" "Whatever you want. I have more money than I know what to do with. Do you want extra? Get her 3 more nice bodyguards and a little something for yourself, too." Jason winked. "This guy is unreal." Olivia fumed, but she stayed calm. "I'll teach him a lesson he will never forget. He thinks this is all a game? I'll make it very entertaining." "Oh, it's going to cost a lot more," she answered lightly. "Do you want to know what the going rate is for hurting innocent people? Or would you rather pay my way? Sounds like you're somebody who's bored with money. You might find my way more interesting. I warn you, though, it's expensive." Jason laughed. "This girl's crazy. Okay, I'm interested. Tell me about your way." "We don't have to get into the details right now in the middle of this competition. I'll have someone personally send a bill to your house." Olivia smiled, but her eyes were menacing. She remembered that Dusty was still bleeding everywhere. He doesn't have much time. We have to move this along. No, tell me now, Jason ordered. Okay, all you have to do is admit that you shot him on purpose. I trust my friends, and I know they wouldn't lie. Everyone here knows it. Just admit it, and we'll work out the repayment later, Olivia offered. Jason's brow furrowed as he thought it over. He glanced from all the onlookers back to Olivia. Okay, fine, I admit it. I got carried away and I shot her bodyguard. Happy? Just tell me how much you want. You can take him to a doctor now if you want, but leave the knife here. Olivia held up the knife like a carrot. You want this knife? Not so fast, Jason. You're gonna have to pay for that too. And I know you can afford it. Jason rolled his eyes. Name your price. You really want to know? Olivia teased. Yes, I want to know. Jason barked impatiently. There's no number you can throw out there that will shock me. Okay. Olivia smiled and winked at Sven before looking back at Jason. I want your left arm. Jason laughed. That's funny. I thought you said my left arm. Olivia smiled back sweetly. No, you heard me right. I said, I want your left arm. Jason's arrogant smirk disappeared from his face. You want my what? He stammered. He still had not fully processed what she said, when suddenly he felt a sharp pain pierce through his left arm. The pain was so sudden that his mind hadn't even processed the sound of the gunshot. Jason screamed and his legs buckled underneath him. All of the onlookers gasped in shock. Jason fell to the ground, roaring in pain. Behind him, Sven stood with his own smoking gun pointed at Jason. He returned the gun to its concealed holster, completely unrattled. Olivia stood over him and didn't bat an eye. One arm seems pretty fair to me, she said calmly, and tossed Wendy's knife on the ground beside him. Oh, and by the way, that's a down payment. I'm still sending you Dusty's medical bills in the mail. Olivia looked down at his whimpering form and turned away in disgust. She led Wendy and Dusty out of the circle, where the terrified onlookers parted to make room for her. Stop her! Stop her! You saw what they just did to me! Jason cried as the onlookers stood frozen in shock. The color had drained from his face, and his own blood pooled around him on the ground. He had never experienced pain and humiliation like this in his entire life. And who's going to stop us? Chris challenged coldly. He glared at everyone standing around Jason. They'd all seen what just happened to Jason, and they cowered in fear. Anyone? Olivia picked out a terrified-looking woman and read her thoughts. I've never seen Chris Jones look like he could kill someone. I just came here to participate in a competition. I didn't mean for anyone to really get hurt, right? We're just here for a good time. There's no need to get into trouble with the Jones family or anyone else. Olivia knew they had won. The woman gingerly stepped forward. I think we're all ready to call it a night. What do you guys say? She nervously asked the others. They all enthusiastically nodded their agreement. Jason held his arm and rolled around on the floor in agony. Someone take me to a damn hospital immediately! The others quickly lifted him up as Jason yelled and cursed in pain. Someone call an ambulance, the woman urged. They all hurried away. Olivia watched them go, and she quickly turned to her own friends. We have to get Dusty out of here, now. Chris, Sven, and Jeremy hurried to help support Dusty for the rest of the walk back. Steve, who wasn't Dusty's biggest fan at the moment, awkwardly hung back. Looks like you've got it, Steve shrugged. Wendy frowned at him. The man has been shot, Steve. Come on. Let's hurry. Dusty's lost a lot of blood, Olivia urged. Olivia, Wendy, Millie, Chris, Sven, Jeremy, and Steve made it back to the Perry castle with the wounded Dusty. They called the Perry family doctor to see Dusty almost immediately. You got here just in time, the Perry family doctor told them solemnly. The good news is he's going to be all right. The bullet did not hit anything important, and his arm will eventually recover. But he'll need to get to the hospital. The doctor tightly bandaged the wound and sent them with Dusty to the hospital. I'll go with him, Wendy volunteered. She felt horrible that this had happened while Dusty was protecting her. That was his job, but it didn't make her feel any less guilty. "I'll go too." Steve stood to follow Wendy. She eyed him skeptically, but he gestured for her to lead the way. Steve knew he needed to step up this time. He supported Dusty all the way to the ambulance and climbed in after Wendy and Dusty for the ride to the hospital. Wendy was shocked to see Steve be so helpful after he was so upset about everything that had happened the other day after they had kissed. Steve didn't complain or anything. He just did the right thing. For the first time, Steve really was the good guy, and Wendy noticed. Thanks for helping, Steve," Wendy said quietly. "Any time," he smiled reassuringly back at her. Back inside Perry Castle, Olivia and her friends returned to the starting point of the competition with their knives. From inside the surveillance room, Royal Perry, Chef Theodore, and Carlton Perry watched them make their way back. Once they saw that the contestants were getting close, the three men left the surveillance room and locked it behind them. Olivia, Chris, Jeremy, Sven, and Millie arrived downstairs just as Royal Perry, Chef Theodore, and Carlton took their seats at the front of the room. Other competitors filed in behind them. Olivia spotted two familiar faces in the crowd and she beamed with relief. "Frances and Lena made it," Olivia exclaimed as she waved them over to join the others. Even though Lena and Frances returned empty-handed, Olivia noticed that Lena looked very pleased. She had a glowing quality about her, and her eyes were bright with excitement. "I guess you did okay then?" Olivia asked in a low voice. Lena smiled widely and nodded. More contestants returned to the room as the clock announced that the 2 hours were up. Royal Perry stood and ordered that the doors be closed. Several servants promptly shut the doors, even as some contestants had not made it back into the room. The doors locked with a click. The people who did not make it back in time were trapped outside, and they knocked on the door in protest. "Hey, let us in!" Muffled voices demanded through the closed doors. Royal Perry shook his head. The rules were clear, and they must be followed. Those who did not make it back in time are out of the competition and can enjoy some consolation tea with the servants in the next room. Lena and Frances glanced at each other with wide eyes. We just barely made it. That was almost us. Royal Perry addressed the room. All 10 knives have been found. Excellent work. Very impressive. He smiled. I invite those 10 pairs of contestants to come forward. Olivia and Jeremy held up their own large, heavy knife, took the small knife that Millie had given them, and gave it to Chris and Sven. Wait, what's this? Chris asked, confused. Why is Olivia giving us Millie and Steve's knife? Millie leaned forward. Steve's got other priorities, and I don't really care about winning this thing. Even if I won, I wouldn't know what to do with it, so I gave it to Olivia. And I'm giving it to you. Olivia placed it in Chris's hands. Wow, thanks. Chris smiled in surprise. Maybe I was wrong that Olivia does care about me after all. She's impossible to read. The 10 pairs of winners stepped forward proudly. It didn't matter how they obtained their knives, as long as they had them when the 2 hours were up. They would pass the first round. It was cutthroat, but that was the game. Royal Perry looked over the 20 winners and smiled. Very good. Now, pairs, decide who will return the knife and advance to the next round. The room erupted in gasps and shocked protest. No one expected that only one person from each pair would get to advance. Olivia felt a wave of relief. Her decision not to choose Chris as her partner had been the right one. Now, they would not have to choose between them. The reality dawned on Chris as well, and he was grateful. He felt bad that he had been so jealous. I need to trust Olivia. Jeremy turned to Olivia and handed her their large, heavy sword. We both know it's supposed to be you. Jeremy smiled. Are you sure? Olivia asked. Of course. Jeremy nodded. Olivia accepted the sword and stepped forward. Sven put the knife in Chris's hands and gave him a nudge to step forward too. Another pair, a man and a woman, agreed on who would advance, and the woman stepped forward to present their knife. Chris narrowed his eyes at the woman. Of course, it was Kelly, Mantis O, and her husband, Big Bear. Kelly caught Chris staring at her and waved back, smiling seductively. Chris looked away from her, not wanting to give her any ideas. So that's who we still have to beat. The remaining 7 partners could have been more cooperative. Suddenly, someone threw a punch, and shouting erupted throughout the room. The crowd fell into chaos. "Enough!" Royal Perry bellowed. The room fell quiet as his voice echoed through the walls. "All of you who are fighting, get out. None of you will advance. I've made my decision." The hulking Perry Castle guard stepped forward and immediately escorted the 14 shocked contestants out. Everyone remaining stood in stunned silence. "Now where were we?" Royal Perry asked pleasantly. "The 3 competitors left will advance to the 3rd round." "3rd round? Doesn't he mean the 2nd? Millie whispered to Lena. Royal Perry smiled mischievously. "Indeed. I forgot to mention that the last round actually was the 2nd round of elimination. An unexpected test. Now, the 3rd round begins." A surprised murmur ran through the crowd. Royal Perry continued, "Before I retire, I will craft a pair of sabers. Just the 2. Olivia's eyes widened. She had been right not to choose Chris as her partner earlier, or else they would both not be standing here as finalists now. But what did 2 sabers instead of 1 really mean for them? It's time for the final test. Royal Perry's electrifying voice rang out over the room. Everyone watching listened with rapt attention. The final round of the competition is designed to test the connection between the partners of each team. Royal Perry explained. This is the most important aspect of the 2 sabers. His gaze roved over the 3 pairs, Olivia and Jeremy, Chris and Sven, and Kelly and Big Bear. Royal Perry grinned and raised his hands dramatically. "I have readied some tools in advance. Bring them out." Royal Perry's butler nodded and turned to the other servants. "Prepare the final round," he instructed. The servants quickly left the room and returned with a wide, beautifully decorated screen that unfolded down the center of the room. More servants carried in 2 long, glossy wooden tables with black cloths covering something on them, and placed them on one side of the screen. Anyone standing on the opposite side would not be able to see the tables or what was going on the other side. Under these black cloths on the table, I've chosen an assortment of items that will soon be revealed, Royal Perry announced. Each team must decide on one person to choose items on one side of the screen, and one person to do the guessing of what their partner chose on the other side of the screen. Royal Perry gestured to the left and the right. The crowd erupted into a low murmur of surprise at the difficulty of this challenge. Their friends in the crowd looked worried. "I think Olivia's got it," Lena whispered to Millie. Royal Perry continued. "This test will measure the degree of understanding between each pair. The 2 knives symbolize the connection between the 2 minds. The worthy wielders of these 2 blades will have a special connection and understanding with each other. Does everyone understand?" Royal Perry asked the remaining competitors. Olivia, Jeremy, Chris, and Sven each nodded to confirm that they understood. Kelly arrogantly rolled her eyes a little before nodding along with her partner Big Bear. "Excellent. Now, make your decisions," Royal Perry announced, gesturing at each pair. Olivia's eyes danced, and she worked hard not to betray her excitement. The final challenge was a guessing game, and her powers to read thoughts gave her the ultimate advantage. No one would be more on the same wavelength than Olivia and her partner. Olivia turned to Jeremy. "You should be the one to choose the object. I trust your decision-making, and I'm a good guesser, so I'll do the guessing." "Are you sure?" Jeremy asked nervously. "Completely sure." You just have to trust me and make your choices wisely. I'll figure it out." Olivia nodded. "Okay," Jeremy agreed. He took a deep breath and stepped forward as the designated chooser. Sven also stepped forward, and so did Big Bear. "If the three of you are ready, you can take your place by the tables on the other side of the screen," Royal Perry instructed. The three of them made their way to the tables behind the screen. Olivia, Chris, and Kelly remained on the opposite side where they couldn't see what was on the tables. Royal Perry clapped his hands and several servants approached the tables. They removed the black cloths to reveal the items to the half of each team that had decided to be the choosers. The onlookers murmured with fascination and interest at the display of varied objects on the tables. It was Jeremy's turn to choose first. Olivia closed her eyes and focused on finding Jeremy with her mind. She could hear him assessing the objects in front of him. Each of them had a different set of objects from which to choose. Jeremy looked down at his first choice. There were 2 drinks in beautiful crystal glasses. One was a deep red wine, and the other was a martini garnished with an olive. "I could choose the drink I think Olivia likes, so that she'll be more able to guess which one I choose." Olivia hears Jeremy's reasons in his head. Olivia's more clever than that, though. She knows how to interpret clues. The martini has an olive, which is pretty close to her name. Jeremy reached out and tapped the martini as his choice. On her side of the screen, Olivia couldn't see which item Jeremy had chosen with her eyes, but she heard it perfectly clearly in his thoughts. She was glad that he had applied some logic to it. It will look like I figured out his clue, rather than assuming like I read his mind. It can't be too suspicious. A servant picked up the tray of drinks and carried them over to Olivia's side of the screen. Olivia raised her eyebrows to express surprise, as if she didn't already know what the items would be. The servant held the tray out to Olivia for her to choose. She eyed them thoughtfully for a minute to play up the uncertainty before she pointed to the martini. "Your first set is correct," the servant announced to the room. The room applauded politely, but Olivia's friends were noticeably more enthusiastic. Royal Perry looked pleased. Olivia could hear what he was thinking. "Very good. That first round was simple. Olive, Olivia." Olivia smiled. "Looks like Jeremy read Royal Perry's mind." She chuckled inwardly. Next, it was Sven's turn to choose and Chris's to guess. Sven decided between a dart and a white cue ball and went with the dart. Chris guessed correctly and passed their first round. Olivia knew they made a smart team for this test. Chris and Sven had practically been brothers their whole lives and knew each other's minds better than anyone. Well, almost better than anyone. Then it was Kelly and Big Bear's turn. Big Bear chose a small, simple, emerald-studded bracelet over a large, gaudy ruby ring. When it was Kelly's turn to decide which she had chosen, she pointed to the ruby ring and smirked confidently. "Your first set is incorrect," the servant announced. Kelly scowled and glared in Big Bear's direction. "You didn't choose the ruby? It's obviously the more impressive of the two." "I thought green for mantis," Big Bear mumbled, annoyed. "How many times have I told you that's not my name?" Kelly snapped. "Thanks for playing. Unfortunately, this is the end for you." Royal Perry waved Kelly and Big Bear away to join the rest of the crowd. Olivia could hear Kelly cursing him in her head, and she felt a small thrill of satisfaction. Chris also looked like he was amused at Kelly's frustration, which Olivia appreciated. Royal Perry announced the beginning of the second set, and now it was down to the 2 teams. Olivia closed her eyes again and zeroed in on Jeremy's thoughts as he stared at a gold spoon and a copper spoon. Olivia has amazing culinary skills, Jeremy thought. Didn't she once tell me that using a copper spoon might react with the food and make it taste weird? Or was it gold? Olivia smiled softly. "It doesn't matter which one you pick because I'll know. But that's amazing you remember me telling you that. Gold is the one that will taste better." Jeremy decided on the gold spoon, and the servant brought the 2 spoons over to Olivia. After a moment, she chose the gold spoon as well. "The second set is correct," the servant announced. "Yes!" Lena and Millie celebrated in the crowd. Royal Perry smiled broadly. Next, after much deliberation, Chris correctly chose a silver lock over a matching key. Olivia felt curious about what the backstory behind that was. I could read his mind, but it would be better to ask him sometime. Royal Perry applauded along with the crowd, and all eyes were on Olivia and Chris. Bruno Johnson's scowl stood out in the crowd. He tightened his jaw and did not clap with the others. He and Chef Mario Vincenzo had competed in the knife hunt earlier, but had failed to find one. The disappointment still stung, and watching Olivia continue in the final round only added salt to the wound. Of all the people it could possibly be, Olivia Johnson wriggled her way into the final round. Bruno raged in his head. "It's an outrage. Who does she think she is? I can barely stand another minute of this." Olivia relished that she got under Bruno's skin so thoroughly. That wasn't her main goal with all of her efforts in the competition, but it was a delicious bonus. Even men as proud and powerful as Bruno could not ignore her anymore. Chef Mario Vincenzo was even more cross as they watched the events unfold. And little did he know, Olivia heard it all loud and clear. She was supposed to be my apprentice. If it weren't for her, I would be the one in the final round instead. I'm one of the most prestigious and respected chefs alive, and I'm not even in the last round of the final knife competition. Instead, it's this little girl. It's despicable. Olivia could hear that they were not the only ones who were very jealous at this moment. She caught internal comments as they flew back and forth. "Someone from the Johnson family, really? Our family is much more prestigious than them. And yet we have to watch her put all of us to shame. I hate that girl. She's just a woman. What's a woman going to do with such a valuable knife anyway? It's way more important than she'll ever be. What a waste." Olivia shook her head and took a breath. Of course they're all jealous. Now is not the time to listen to any of that nonsense. The only thoughts that matter right now are Jeremy's. Olivia focused in on Jeremy and heard fear in his mind. "It's down to this, and we win or lose it all," he thought nervously. Jeremy stared at the final 2 items. 2 knives. They were blunt and unfinished. One was small enough to fit in his palm and easily conceal. Definitely used for quick assassination. The other one was a longer, strangely shaped blade, and he was not sure what it was for. "I really have no idea which one to choose that Olivia would be able to guess," he worried. "I guess it's 50-50. Olivia felt for Jeremy, wishing she could comfort him with her thoughts. "It doesn't matter which one you choose. I will know which one is right." Jeremy gritted his teeth and chose the short assassin's blade. Olivia smiled inwardly. This choice felt appropriate, but Jeremy was so needlessly agonized, and she had no way to tell him it would all be fine. He'll find out soon enough. The servant carried the tray of 2 knives over to Olivia, and without hesitation, she chose the short knife. "The third set is correct," they announced. In the crowd, Lena, Millie, and Frances jumped up and down excitedly. "And now for—" Royal Perry began to say, but Chris held up his hand. "I want to forfeit from the competition," Chris interrupted. Sven smiled knowingly. The crowd gasped, unable to believe someone would just give up like that. Chris knew his decision to forfeit would leave everyone shocked, but he didn't care. He had come all the way to Paris to help Olivia win the final knife, not to get wrapped up in the competition itself. Her winning was the most important thing to him. He didn't need to waste any more of anyone's time. He turned to Olivia. "Congratulations, Miss Johnson," he smiled. For the first time during this round, Olivia was caught by surprise. She did not expect Chris to forfeit like that. Did he really do that? For me? "Thank you," Olivia stammered and smiled back at Chris. She liked that Chris had seemed a little jealous when she chose Jeremy as her partner, but she also didn't want to hurt him either. In spite of that, he had still decided to help her win, and that meant a lot. She wished she could tell him that it really was just a matter of strategy. She went in knowing that reading thoughts would almost certainly be an advantage she would need to use, and she had been right. She could have read Chris's mind for the competition, but deep down, she was afraid of what else she might find there. She didn't want any of that to be a distraction for her. Looking at Chris smiling at her now, as the winner, she knew she made the right call. This is what I wanted. "Then we have our champions," Royal Perry announced, delighted. All of Olivia's friends burst into cheers, and the rest of the crowd joined in the applause as well. They had to seem like gracious losers. Jeremy emerged from behind the screen with a giant grin on his face. "We won!" he yelled, and swept her into a big hug. "How did you guess the last one? I thought for sure I blew it choosing that one," Jeremy said breathlessly. "I told you I'm a good guesser." Olivia shrugged. At that moment, they were surrounded by their friends congratulating them. Royal Perry's voice boomed over the noise. "Everyone, please make your way to the next hall, where we will enjoy the celebration feast concluding the competition." Everyone excitedly moved in the direction of the banquet hall. Olivia and Jeremy started to follow, but Royal Perry called out to them. "Olivia, Jeremy, you two follow me." Royal Perry beckoned. They looked at each other, unsure of what this meant. They nodded and followed Royal Perry out of the room in the opposite direction of everyone else. Carlton Perry went with them. Chris Jones also watched Olivia and Jeremy leave with Royal Perry. He didn't see Chef Theodore approach, who teasingly poked his leg with his walking stick. "Did you see a ghost or something?" Chef Theodore chuckled. "I've heard this castle is haunted, but it's a little early in the evening for that." Chris looked back at Chef Theodore. "Oh, granduncle. For losing the last knife, you don't seem too broken up about it," Chef Theodore lightly observed. Chris shook his head. "I was out of my depth in the last round. I thought it would be better to forfeit rather than lose anyway. Olivia and Jeremy earned it." Chef Theodore smiled knowingly and leaned in. "There are a lot of girls out there, but there are only a few who have the potential to be the one that got away. If you don't go for what you want, someone else might, if you get my meaning." "What? I wasn't—" Chris blushed. Chef Theodore just smiled and whistled as he turned around and walked toward the banquet hall. Chris stood there alone, a little flustered. He looked back at the direction they had gone. Where did Royal Perry take Jeremy and Olivia? "I thought the competition was over. What else could Royal Perry possibly have in store for us?" Olivia wondered, as she, Jeremy, and Carlton followed Royal Perry down what felt like another endless hall. She was tempted to ask where they were going, but if Royal Perry wanted them to know, he would have told them. They continued walking through the castle in silence. Olivia's defenses were slowly starting to go up. The corridor they walked down was completely unfamiliar to her. "If he wants to congratulate us, I'm not sure why we have to go to the farthest, most hidden room in the entire castle." At last, Royal Perry stopped them at an old door with a large, formidable lock on it. Carlton stepped forward and took out an ancient-looking silver key. He turned the key in the lock, and with a satisfying click, the door creaked open. Inside, a flight of stone stairs led straight down into the darkness. Carlton flipped on a switch, and gas torches lit the way. "Great, another stairway," Olivia thought as they stepped down. Once they reached the bottom of the stairs, there was another door. This time, Carlton opened a panel on the wall next to the door and entered multiple complicated passwords. Once both were accepted, he placed his palm on the screen. After a few moments, the screen turned green. Then he leaned forward to expose his eye to the screen. Olivia watched the scanner rove over Carlton's eye. There must be something extremely important in there. This time, the screen turned blue, and Olivia could hear the complicated mechanisms in the door unlocking. The door beeped and swung open. Once they stepped through, Olivia realized where they were. "This is where you forged the blades?" Olivia exclaimed. She looked over the multiple anvils and tools all around the pristine workshop. On the walls, Olivia saw framed photos of the many privileged recipients posing with the knives they commissioned from Knife God. Precisely, Royal Perry confirmed as they followed him in. I keep all of my raw materials for forging every knife here as well. It's incredible. Olivia breathed in awe. She could feel the heat radiating from the forge itself. It warmed the whole space by several degrees more than the rest of the castle. If I ever got caught in a snowstorm here, this is the place to be. Very few people have ever set foot in my private forge. Since you are the winners of my competition, I've brought you here to see it and ask you what kind of blade you would like me to craft for you. Royal Perry explained as he took a seat behind an impressive desk and shuffled some papers. He gestured at 2 deep armchairs for Olivia and Jeremy to sit. Carlton appeared from around the corner with a tray of steaming hot tea. The Allée, he said dryly as he placed cups in front of them. Olivia felt strange being served by the heir to the Royal Perry estate, but this entire trip had been filled with strange new experiences, and this was hardly any weirder. Thank you, she said as she took her cup. Olivia looked back at Royal Perry, who waited for their answers. I would like a knife that's useful, she said. Royal Perry laughed. Useful? That's too broad. You'll have to get more specific. I know you're not a blade connoisseur, so I'll offer some direction. A blade might be used for hunting, for defense. He continued listing off many uses for knives. Olivia listened and then knew the exact answer. She couldn't believe she hadn't thought of it sooner. I could use a chef's knife. Royal Perry nodded thoughtfully. Very well. Your mentor's knife was forged by me. In fact, all of the greatest chefs currently alive had their knives forged by me. Some of them even found rare materials and asked me to craft custom blades with them. That's right, Olivia smiled. I have always heard that all of your handcrafted blades are the best in the world. Not for long, I'm afraid, Royal Perry laughed. As you know, it is my time for me to retire before I get too old, and my quality suffers enough to cost me that distinction. I imagine the Perry reputation will continue, though, once you pass it on to your heir. Olivia nodded to Carlton. Carlton cast his eyes down to the floor uncomfortably. Carlton? Royal Perry smiled and shook his head. He is a fine young man, but I'm afraid his talent in the art of knife craftsmanship is not to the level that would meet the world's expectations, I'm afraid. Besides, my father always said it was unwise to let the Perry family become too renowned. Jealousy can attract danger. The brand ending with me is for the best. Olivia noticed that when Royal Perry said these words, a flicker of hatred flashed through his eyes. It came through so clearly that she could not unsee it. She peered into his thoughts and saw painful memories of his son and daughter-in-law's tragic car crash. Olivia could hear the agony in Royal Perry's head and the anger at whoever had caused their deaths. Her eyes widened as she realized what he knew. Royal Perry believes the crash was a deliberate assassination. He must be protecting Carlton from putting a target on his back as the next knife god. What a heartbreaking secret to keep. If the knife god himself is afraid of whoever killed them, they must be very threatening. Olivia thought this over. She felt bad that Carlton had to go through life believing he wasn't inheriting the family business because he wasn't good enough. Carlton was the only heir left. It must feel humiliating to think that Royal Perry would rather see his legacy end than trust Carlton with it. All the while, the real reason was that he only wanted to protect his heir from a similar fate as his parents. She now understood the shame in Carlton's face, and she felt sorry for him. He hid it well, but she knew. And what about you? Royal Perry turned to Jeremy. Young Mr. Jarbaldi, what kind of knife would you like me to craft for you? Jeremy nodded and answered, Something that I can use to protect my loved ones. he said without hesitation. His eyes darted to Olivia and then quickly back to Royal Perry. What a nice idea, Olivia thought. She wasn't sure what she expected Jeremy to ask for, but hearing he wanted to protect others was a pleasant surprise and one she respected. Did that glance at me mean he was talking about me? Royal Perry seemed just as surprised but smiled. The best thing, purely to protect the ones you love, is probably a shield rather than a knife. Can't a knife be used against anyone trying to hurt the people you care about? Jeremy asked. Of course it can, but it is not the only thing you need to be a protector, Royal Perry said in a serious tone. The most important weapons you must cultivate to protect others are your heart and your mind. He tapped the table with his finger. It doesn't matter what weapon you have, but what do you have in yourself? Remember that. Yes, I will remember. Jeremy nodded. Good. Are there any other requests? Royal Perry asked them both. Only that I can cook anything with it. Olivia smiled. I completely trust your judgment. Jeremy held up his hands. Olivia wondered if pictures of her and Jeremy holding their own knives would end up on one of the walls in the workshop too. All right then, Royal Perry said as he jotted some notes. In about 3 months' time, I will invite you back to the estate and personally host a grand banquet to debut the 2 knives once they are complete. You'll receive them during the ceremony. That is so generous, Olivia responded, eyebrows raised. We can't thank you enough, Jeremy stammered. It is my pleasure. Royal Perry smiled widely. Now, let's get you all to the banquet. We've taken long enough. Carlton stood and motioned for them to follow him out of the workshop. Before exiting, Olivia glanced back at Royal Perry sitting at his desk. Sitting there, behind such a large desk in the empty, hidden room, surrounded only by his priceless tools, Olivia couldn't help but think he looked lonely. Looking closely now, he looked older and more tired than the entire time she had been at the estate. Maybe he had less time than he let on. She turned and followed Carlton and Jeremy out to the stairs. As soon as Olivia and Jeremy walked through the banquet hall doors, a hush fell over the giant room. Olivia stared straight ahead and ignored all of the jealous glares. Olivia, over here! Lena waved to get her attention. This way! Olivia was so glad to see Lena waving at her in the sea of hostile enemies. She grinned and waved back. She and Jeremy joined their friends at a big round table. Everyone patted them on the backs and offered excited congratulations. This is what friends are for, Olivia thought happily. Unlike their usual meals, this dinner was not a buffet. Every table had its own feast spread out between them. There were bowls of French onion soup, a bounty of cheeses, fruits, nuts, and French bread, a big pot of beef bourguignon, cuts of country ham covered in mushrooms, lobster thermidor, platters of roasted chicken, potatoes in many forms, steaming vegetables, and multiple bottles of fine wine filled the table. They also had their own little mountain of cream puffs and cookies for dessert. It all smelled wonderful. Olivia shrugged off their compliments and congratulations. Thanks, but I just got very lucky. Where were you guys? Lena asked. Royal Perry had us choose what knives we wanted and said that he'll have us back to get them when they're ready, Olivia explained. So it's all really over, Lena said wistfully. We're not going home until the day after tomorrow, so there's still time to visit Dusty at the hospital. We can even get some souvenirs before we go, Olivia added. I don't know about that, Millie warned as she stared at her phone in alarm. You might want to get home ASAP. What do you mean? Olivia asked. It's your family. Look at this, it's all over the news. Millie handed her phone to Olivia. My family? Olivia's eyes scanned the article on Millie's phone. Lena peered at Millie's phone next to Olivia. Your dad is getting divorced? She gasped. Olivia was speechless. There it was, clear as day. Chaos erupts from Johnson divorce. She scrolled through, trying to absorb the words, but her head spun. Is this real? Olivia, you look like you're smiling. Lena shook her head with concern. Don't you see what happened? Lena began to read out loud. Michael Johnson broke estranged wife Rachel's heart when he insisted on a divorce right before Rachel and their daughter Monica were caught in a terrible fire. Many suspect Michael Johnson is to blame since Rachel was not signing the papers fast enough. There's no way he's behind this. Olivia shook her head. It doesn't make any sense. He would never do that. Olivia was in complete shock, but she knew in her gut that this was not her father's fault. As horrible as it was, she didn't feel sorry at all for Rachel and Monica. If anything, this tactic is to try and gain sympathy, or to get back at my mom and me. I guarantee those two are up to something. Olivia looked up from Millie's phone and saw that everyone around the room was seeing the same story on their phones. She felt all of their hate-filled eyes on her. Olivia felt her stomach drop, and all of the good feelings she had up to this point were sucked out of the room. Now everyone thinks my dad tried to murder his wife and daughter.